I've danced on Jimmy Kimmel Live, made it on an epic rap battles of history video that got 56 million views, was in charge of first-year college students at their dorms, built some Asian restaurants, hated engineering, made boba drinks, hired door-to-door salespeople in the middle of a pandemic. So now I've raised over 20 million of investor capital for commercial real estate syndications, all in under 10 years. I knew I needed to take as many risks as possible because I knew the risks were only going to get harder to take the more I grew older. Here's what I've learned. Before the dated 10-year mark, the first job I ever had was being a hip-hop dance teacher in high school. Now, don't get this twisted. It wasn't like I had a natural, innate, God-given talent to move and groove, and I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a professional dancer. I got into dance just because I wanted to impress this one girl in middle school who is she was a professional dancer doing all these different gigs, crews, parades. She did the Thanksgiving parade, competitions, and I was over here not dressing well at all, dancing like I did the swivel thing, like I was like passing out pizzas. So I just decided to take my talents to YouTube and teach myself via video. But after years of just practicing in my room, I got good enough to be able to teach, and I always thought if it happens to where I could get gigs, hell yeah, I'll do it. So I joined crews, casually went to auditions just to see what would happen, and I ended up loving it. So fast forward to my last year of college, I was able to land a big stage opportunity through meeting a choreographer at one of his dance classes. Ended up dancing backup on Jimmy Kimmel Live for Vic Mensa and Travis Barker. Before y'all start asking though, I don't have the video footy. Jimmy Kimmel took it down, somewhat of a controversial video because the dance was about police brutality. But aside from this info, I'm not really sure why they took it down. And to be honest, it wasn't really spectacular dancing either. All I did was like pose, and then pose, and then pose, and then hit a little boom boom, and then grab Vic Mensa. If you're interested, this is a video of a performance from another concert, and I was the one, like, I was grabbing him, but you get the gist, right? I thought that this was the gig that would define the rest of my career. And it did, but not how I expected it. I did the gig, and then it came around to signing the contract so we could get paid. The contract went around, and I noticed none of the dancers were signing the contract. We were supposed to get paid $1,000, but contract only said $250 because they didn't include our rehearsal time. So no one signed it. They told the manager handing out the contracts to talk to their agent, which was a problem because homeboy wasn't signed by an agency. And so I talked to the choreographer about it, and he was like, yeah, I got you. I'll let you know when it comes around, and I'll get it over to you. So I wait, follow up, wait again, follow up again, reached out to his agent, eventually hearing nothing, which sucks, and I never got paid. And granted, it was only $1,000, but this was the catalyst towards taking control of my own financial future, and that I can't rely on others. And I knew I needed to control my own wealth because I never wanted to feel that feeling again. When I was in college, I needed a job and decided to utilize my dance skills to become a mascot. I showed up to the interview, did an audition, and got it right away. And they didn't even know that I danced. But for some reason, I decided to give it my all whenever I suited up. I treated myself like one of the Jabberwockies, a dance crew that wears masks, one of my inspirations, greatest of all times, acting a fool, being expressive without words, and just entertaining. And it happened to be just one of the best jobs that I've ever had because I had so much fun just dancing, messing with people, making people laugh. And what's crazy is I ended up building relationships with some of the fans at the basketball games, created some secret handshakes with them, and they didn't know who I was, but I knew exactly who they were. Definition of an undercover celebrity. But because I was having so much fun doing it, I'm a true believer that translated into people enjoying my entertainment. One day I get a call from my boss and he was like, hey, I have someone who wants to hire you for a gig. I was thinking, cool, happy to do it. Who's asking? This person happened to be my boss's, coworkers, friend's husband.
I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's.
Who saw me perform at one of the games and I guess was a big fan. But her husband happened to be one of the co-founders for a big YouTube channel called Epic Rap Battles of History. They were looking for someone to dance in a suit. So I, of course, said yes, Ubered over to their studio in Culver City, got camera shy, but suited up and did the gig, and thought it was one of the coolest gigs I've ever done. That ended up not being the only gig either. I ended up helping the LA Clippers for a little, training to be their backup mascot. I was even offered to be the king for the Burger King campaign. I would have loved to take the Burger King job, but I had a concussion at the time from a hang gliding accident because I was going through a breakup, trying to be adventurous and shit. And I deeply regret it because I had to turn that down. So if I end up disappearing, you know who called me. But needless to say, none of these opportunities would have never come up if I didn't give it my all in the suit. I never intentionally networked to try and get these gigs, but even with my name and face being hidden, I was still able to capture the attention of some amazing people. And so learning lesson from this whole experience, you never know who's watching. Something else that I did in college, I was a resident advisor for the dorms. No, it wasn't all about just shutting parties down. I was in charge of building community at the dorms and overseeing just people's living spaces, making sure everything's cool. But on college campuses, it's unfortunately not all fun and games, and not even just about school, because there's a good chance stress, anxiety, depression, or even worse, sexual assault occurs. And I was an RA for first year students, and what's crazy about this is that this is their first time on their own trying to figure out how to manage all of this. And here, I discovered a pretty powerful strength of being able to build relationships despite some of the differences. Two of the most important skills I learned is active listening and conflict mediation. Active listening. As an RA, you're listening 90% of the time. Whether you're listening to students being homesick, struggling to find a job, struggling with their long-distance relationship back home. Being an active listener is completely different than just being present. It goes far beyond just putting your phone away and making eye contact. Being an active listener is to show the other person that they're being heard, to show the other person that you can empathize with their situation. Now, of course, there's always going to be times where you're not going to fully understand their situation, but you can still show that you're listening. This skill set carries to so many different facets in life, relationships, career, whatever. Now, first off, let's define what active listening isn't. Someone tells you something very personal. Then you respond by saying something along the lines of, hey, I've been there before. Don't let something so small get you down. While intentions are there to show that you can relate to their situation, it comes off as you are belittling their feelings and saying, hey, it's no big deal. But this could be a huge deal for them. And a big no-no is unsolicited advice. We all know those people that try and play mentor all the time, trying to fix everything, thinking they know everything. But realistically, sometimes people don't want advice and they just want to be heard. And so while advice comes with good intentions, at the end of the day, the person needs to do the work to figure it out for themselves. Instead, there's a simple way of showing to the other person that you're listening to them. And it's this technique called mirroring. I learned this from Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. He was an FBI hostage negotiator that found that the same negotiation tactics apply to everyday negotiations we have in life. Mirroring involves repeating just the last 3 words or the critical 1 to 3 words of what someone just said. This method encourages the other person to elaborate more and creating a sense of empathy and understanding. For example, someone says, yeah, man, that's such a bad accent. Yeah, man, my teacher got mad at me for calling him an insurrectionist. You respond, called him an insurrectionist? I was like, yeah, and he's an insurrectionist. He's the one that took January 6th off to storm the Capitol. And then you're like, you stormed the Capitol? And as you can see here, they're just going back and forth, but you're giving them permission to share more. But with this mirroring technique, it's actually the gatekeeper to the next step, which is actually working through the conflict. So conflict mediation, another byproduct skill of being an RA, is having to deal with roommate issues. Some are blessed with roommates that get along very well. Some aren't blessed and got to deal with a roommate that is totally misaligned from one another. If they have issues, they needed to figure it out, or we would step in and be the mediator. Not necessarily solve their problems, but guide them to a solution as a neutral party. This is straight up like a negotiation. You go in there, one roommate can't feel belittled or favorited over the other. Both roommates have to feel like they're in a win-win situation. But more importantly, both want to feel respected. There are 2 rules to handling conflict. One of the most important things not to do is point the U-gun. Going at someone saying, you don't know what you're talking about, you're dumb, you make me feel like shit. This isn't productive at all, because the moment you point the U gun, the other person is automatically going to have to get their guard up and get defensive. Then they're going to point the U gun back at you, and then you're in this whole standoff. The best way to reframe something like this is to find a common goal. But in order to find that common goal first, you need to, number 2, diffuse the emotions to get to the solutions. Emotions can get really difficult to deal with because it causes people to think irrationally. You might have to step back, broaden the goal if there are extremely stark differences. Let's use a common example I dealt with. There's 2 roommates. One was studious, the other was a party student. Party student kept bringing people over even though the studious student wanted quiet time to study. The obvious answer was to compromise. Dedicated study hours, but then also dedicated times where people can come over. But they were too stubborn to compromise and figure it out. The party student thought his roommate was a lame-o, while the studious student thought the party student was throwing away his future. The best way to reframe a situation like this is to highlight the bigger picture. They weren't really being stubborn because they wanted to spite each other, because they had ill intent. At the end of the day, these people were really doing this because they have an extreme care and passion for how they want to live their college experience, which both of them can respect. It's a little far-stretched, but they have to respect that. But once you're able to highlight that, then you can come into the compromise. So defuse the emotion, then you can get to the solution. And if you can paint this picture and have these two truly see eye to eye with a level of respect, you've created a win-win situation. I used these 2 skills a lot when I got out of college for my first job, a project manager for a general contractor building some Asian restaurants. The challenging part of construction is you don't know what you don't know, and it's hard to ask the questions if you don't know what's next. It's not like Legos or Bionicles or an IKEA desk with numbered instructions. You got to know what to do. We were an extremely small company, so my resources were only the partners, and I had to manage subcontractors, which can be incredibly difficult. Not all subcontractors, but there could be incredibly difficult ones. So subcontractors know immediately if someone is what they call green, which means you are brand spanking new and have 0 experience and probably don't know what you're talking about. If they smell that, they can most likely take advantage of you. You can try and be nice in hopes that they won't take advantage of you, or you can try and be an asshole and tell them what to do, leading them to not want to work with you for the next job. If you are new, you're pretty much at the mercy of the subs. But here's where you need to figure out how to think ahead and get the subcontractors what they want and what they need. Putting yourself in their shoes thinking, I need X to get done in order for me to complete Y. If you can provide them X, so their time isn't wasted, and streamline their work as much as possible, subcontractors will love you and want to work with you all the time, because what subcontractors absolutely hate is when they get to a job and they can't do any work because their part of the job isn't ready for them, essentially wasting their time when 90% of the time they could be at another job doing work. I learned this the hard way, where I didn't leverage my resources or my time. Story time. We had a framing crew that was driving down from Los Angeles. I was in charge of ordering framing material for them to get it delivered to the job site. And keep in mind, this is commercial grade framing material. Metal studs. This isn't something that you can just order at Home Depot or Lowe's. We needed to get this from an actual building supply store to have a semi-truck deliver it. All metal studs ranging anywhere between 10 to 16 foot studs. Mind you, this job site was in the middle of an extremely busy outdoor mall. We only could deliver before 10 a.m., so we're not disturbing any of the customers. So I did the takeoff, meaning figuring out how much material we need, ran it by the partners, they accepted, and I called the building supply store to place the order. They sent me an invoice and I sent it to someone in the office for processing the invoice to get it scheduled for the next morning. And I never heard from that person in the office. And turns out that the person in the office was out of office, and I didn't find out about this until the end of the day. So they never placed the order, which means we weren't getting any deliveries. By the time I called the building supply company, they were closed. I had 5 framers coming to the job site the next day with potentially nothing for them to do, which will be wasted time, which means wasted money and delayed time on the project. I told my boss, and he was livid, just screaming at me. And the best I could do was to try and call them first thing in the morning and see if they have time to deliver at our site. I get a call at 4:30 a.m. the next morning from my boss telling me to be prepared to call the building supply company when they open at 5 a.m. I call them at 5 a.m. and the best they could do is deliver it at 12 p.m. The busiest time of the day at the mall since it's lunch rush. I just say, fuck it, let's do it. Scheduled the delivery, framing crew scheduled to arrive at 11 a.m., but when they arrive, I could have them take a lunch, no big deal. I knew I had to take the hit from the property manager because I couldn't risk losing a day's worth of work. So my plan was to try and play dumb and ask for the property manager's forgiveness, which obviously doesn't make my boss happy because they needed to save face and keep the relationship with the property manager. Framers come in, confused since materials weren't there, rush hour hits, and then there's this big ass semi truck carrying a ton of material. He needed to take a forklift to take the material down from the truck and drop the material off inside the space, but we ended up blocking off the entire street. All of a sudden, I hear my name, Taylor, what the hell is going on? And it was the property manager, and I plead, truck is going to leave in 20 minutes. I'm so sorry. He's obviously done. He wasn't even close. I could see the anger from the mall customers driving by because they're in traffic. Then all of a sudden, I got the delivery driver. He comes up to me and asks if he can use the bathroom. In the middle of all of this traffic, I said, hey, is it possible that you can use the bathroom after you finish dropping off the material so you can get out of the way as soon as possible? He was pissed. He was like, you won't even let me use the bathroom? This is the last time I'm doing you a favor. And he stormed off into his truck, completed his job in about 30 minutes, and then just left. Framers got to work, and I remember going to just a quiet place in the job site by myself, back against the wall, and just plop on the ground. I have never had so many people mad at me in 24 hours. Boss yelling at me, property manager yelling at me, truck driver yelling at me, all the mall customers pissed because they're in traffic, framers pissed because they lost a couple of hours and had to stay back just to get back on track, all because I didn't follow up and make sure a key piece of information got to the right person. This was a hard lesson, but I learned that information shouldn't stop at me. I learned to follow up and make sure information gets to the right people at the right time, or else it can snowball and compound and affect so many other people along the way. Way to get through it, Taylor. I'm not gonna lie, after this first project, can't say I loved it, but I learned a lot, got enough experience to make it to an engineering firm, a big boy corporate job in the big old city of San Francisco, baby. I was able to use my construction background and leverage my mechanical engineering degree to become a commissioning engineer, which is like an engineer that tests all the systems in a building to make sure it works per the plans for the owner. I worked in San Francisco, felt like a big boy, walking around with the rest of the SF tech bros with the long sleeve collared shirts and Patagonia vest. The job I had was solid. It had a nice salary, benefits, room for growth, stability, everything that my parents would be proud of, but for some reason, I still had this uncomfortable feeling. It wasn't uncomfortable and in your face like construction, it was subtle. Like in construction, if you don't know what you're talking about, you look like a deer in the headlights, like I have no idea what I'm doing. But something seemed off. And it took me a while to figure it out because this didn't seem to scare everyone else except for me. Like I was the only one who could see the monster under the bed while everyone thinks I'm crazy. I remember riding the train into the city, riding the ferry into the city. You see the same people in the same seats every single day. And they've been doing this for 40 years. And I felt like I was looking into my future. And if I kept on the same path, I would then find my own seat that I would sit at every day. But this was odd because people usually fear the unknown, but in my case, I feared the known. So sometimes knowing exactly where you're heading loses the fun in going along for the ride. My parents owned a few boba shops in the Bay Area. In between jobs, I needed to make some money on the side, so I worked at my parents' boba shop. Being a Boba-Rista is making bubble tea drinks. You know, the Asian drinks with the black balls? I was too slow at making drinks. So I was pretty much stuck at the cash register taking people's orders and slowing the line down if it got too busy. But it wasn't so much about the actual work that was the challenge. I was battling with my own internal ego. Our shops were near our hometown, so you would see familiar faces from middle school or high school. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty popular in high school. I was class president for a couple years, always talked about doing big things, but for the people you grew up with, to see you at a boba shop working, knowing you've put all of this work into getting an engineering degree that was known for job stability, to now recommending what our most popular drinks are because you're slow as shit in making drinks, shit humbles you. And your riz doesn't get any better. Now, in reality, the time I was working at the boba shop, we were waiting for permits to be pulled so I can build to their next shop as a general contractor. So whenever I was taking a cute girl's drink, I would talk to them and try and impress them. Like, yeah, this is my parents' shop. I actually build restaurants. I'm actually about to build their next shop since I'm an engineer and all. But all they really heard was I'm working for my mom and dad. And so they're like, sure you are. Can I get 50% sweetness and less ice? Bruh. But this moment taught me something. No matter what degree you get, everyone has to pay their dues in one way or another. You never know who might be waiting at your table that could be the next pop singer or next major actor. We don't know what people's situations are. This could be the job that helps them chase their dreams. So if you're in a job that you're not feeling, just own up to it, learn something, and then check that ego right at the door and humble yourself that you're no better than anyone else. So after being a Boba-Rista, built their next shop, COVID happened. It was a blessing in disguise because at this point, I didn't really want to do construction any longer. I wanted to go into commercial real estate syndications, but still needed money on the side. Since my parents had a career in recruiting, I was able to get my foot in the door at a recruiting agency, helping people find jobs. The majority of jobs that I was tasked to fill were door-to-door sales positions. First off, I didn't think people still sold door-to-door aside from Mormons. I thought, and no disrespect to Mormons, I just thought it was a dead sales strategy. But second, how in the world was I supposed to hire someone for a position like this in the middle of a pandemic? I would reach out to a majority of college students, and I eventually found the niche in storytelling of super successful entrepreneurs that actually started their career in selling door-to-door. So I used this framework, which obviously didn't work for everybody, but it was just a challenge in itself that I thought was completely different than your typical, let's say, engineering role where they have experience and knowledge or they don't. So yes, there needed to be a volume of qualified candidates, which technically there were. There's a lot of college students, but no one gets out of college and thinks, I want to do door-to-door sales. Because it wasn't just about pay, benefits, or growth within a company like a typical job hiring process would be. So I would have to reach out to a ton of people on LinkedIn, cold calling from ZipRecruiter, Monster, any other job listing sites. And after doing this for about a year or so, I wanted to move up in pay and decided to apply to other companies. And good lordy lord, some of these interviews were like 5 hours long. I was able to land an interview with 6 different companies, got denied by 5 of them, and the feedback came back and it was all about my conversion metrics were too low. Conversion metrics meaning number of reach outs converted to submittals, converted to hires, and they were low compared to other recruiters that were going for the same position. But other recruiters also didn't have the challenge of hiring door-to-door salespeople. And I knew I was a good candidate for the position. I knew I could sell the positions I was hiring for, but my numbers stopped me. And I got so irked by it. I hated that I was defined by a number, which is unfortunate because that's typically what qualifies and quantifies top performers. But numbers don't paint the entire picture. Numbers don't necessarily show the quality of their performance. Perfect example for this is an NBA player from my favorite team of all time, Draymond Green from the Golden State Warriors. When he's not choking somebody and he's not punching somebody, he also doesn't get very great stats either. He's nicknamed the triple single. And if you only look at him for his stats, why would anybody want him on their team? But what a lot of people don't understand is the impact that he has on the game, his team, and on the bench. Stats don't pick up how many times he switched on defense. Stats don't pick up how many times each of his off-ball screens get another player open. Stats don't pick up his high IQ of the game by making strong defensive plays. Yet, he just got awarded a 4-year, $100 million contract. Stats don't mean everything. So don't define yourself by them and don't let anyone use them to define you and your impact. Now, back to the interviews. I ended up getting one job offer out of the 6 interviews. I ended up declining that job because I ended up getting lucky. All right, let's be real. I didn't really want to be a recruiter full time. I wanted to go into commercial real estate syndications, primarily in multifamily. I found to love real estate. I really liked how commercial real estate was valued. And commercial real estate syndications is where you get a group of investors buy a large building that one couldn't buy on their own. And to break into something like this can be very difficult because you either need to know somebody, have money to invest, find a deal, analyze a deal, or have a network of people willing to invest in something like this, which I had none of them. Shoot, I was living at my parents' house. I mean, I guess you could get a mentor, but some of these mentorship groups could cost anywhere between $20,000 to $80,000, which I, of course, didn't have, so I had to get creative. Since I couldn't add value and since I couldn't actually invest any money, I knew the best thing to do was to invest in myself and my network by using a credit card. And I got into $30,000 worth of high interest personal credit card debt and didn't tell my parents. I used that money to invest in a business/podcast coach, started a podcast, bought a few courses/masterminds, moved to Austin for a month to position myself to learn some skills from multifamily syndicators, all while only getting paid about $21 an hour as a recruiter. Homeboy was maxed out and pretty much only making minimum payments. Austin didn't work out, and I was ready to quit on this dream, but that syndicator actually sent me a job posting for an investor relations associate for another firm. So I decided to give it a shot. There were over 300 applicants for this position, supposedly with way better resumes than me and all coming from institutional backgrounds. Well, come to find out, they found it was easier to train someone brand new than to detrain and retrain somebody that's been in the industry for 10 plus years. And so now 2 years later, I've raised over $20 million in investor capital for commercial real estate syndications and even hosted dinners and webinars that helps others learn about this space as well. I've built relationships and sat at tables that I really wasn't destined to be at. And all I can say is that I was extremely lucky. None of this was meant to happen. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, but I sure am grateful that I took the action to invest in my skill set and network, because I can guarantee if I hadn't taken any action that I wouldn't have been able to tap into the luck that was presented before me. So future Taylor, if you're watching this years later, I hope you've continued to take actions, continued to take risks, and bet on yourself. I can't wait to see what more you've accomplished. Thanks for watching.